Someone drove through Los Angeles before sunrise with a dead woman in their car. They carried her to a vacant lot. They laid her out in the grass, carefully, like they had all the time in the world. And then they got back in their car and drove away. And 10 days later, they mailed her belongings to a newspaper, just to make sure everyone knew they were still out there. They were never caught, not then, not ever. Welcome to Drawn to Crime, where real mysteries unfold through animation. And today, I need to tell you about the Black Dahlia. Before I tell you what happened, I need to tell you about Elizabeth. Not the headline, not the nickname, not the case. Elizabeth Short. She was 22 years old. She grew up in Massachusetts, one of 5 daughters. Her father disappeared when she was little. Her family was told he had died. And then one day, he just turned up, alive, somewhere else entirely. She came to Los Angeles because she wanted something more. She worked waitressing jobs, moved around, tried to find her footing. And people who knew her always came back to the same thing. She was warm. She was funny. She made people feel like they'd known her their whole lives. She was just a girl trying to build something. And on the morning of January 15th, 1947, a woman is walking through a vacant lot in Los Angeles with her young daughter. It's early, quiet, an ordinary morning. And she looks down at the grass, and she stops walking. And she pulls her daughter close, and she starts screaming. What she found in that lot, I want you to really hear this. Elizabeth had been placed there, carefully, like someone had taken their time, like someone had wanted her to be found exactly like that. And the grass underneath her was completely clean. No blood, none at all. Which means wherever Elizabeth was killed, it wasn't there. Someone killed her somewhere else, and then drove through the streets of Los Angeles before the city woke up, carried her to that lot, laid her out, and got back in their car and drove away. Now, 10 days after they found her, the whole city of Los Angeles is losing its mind over this case. It's on every front page, every radio bulletin, every conversation. And then the Los Angeles Examiner gets a package. No return address. Nobody knows what it is. So they open it up and start pulling things out. At first they can't work out what they're looking at. Just items, random things. And then someone picks up a piece of paper and they go quiet. It's a birth certificate, and the name on it is Elizabeth Short. So now everyone is moving, pulling everything else out of the package. And it's her social security card, her photographs, her address book, with names written inside in her own handwriting. And at the very bottom, there's a note, made from letters cut out of newspapers, arranged to spell out, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." They waited for that letter. It never came. And here's what that means. Really think about this. Whoever did this had been sitting somewhere in Los Angeles for 10 days, reading every article about themselves, holding her things, watching the city fall apart over what they had done. And then they decided to say hello. Not because they were scared, not because they wanted to confess, because they were enjoying it. Now, here's the part that changes everything about this case, and I need you to hold on to this. The last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short alive was January 9th, 6 days before they found her. She was at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, standing in the lobby, looked like she was waiting for someone. She was there for a while. People noticed her, and then she left. And that's it. That is the last moment anyone can place her. The coroner determined she had been dead for around 10 to 12 hours when she was found on the morning of the 15th, which puts her death on the night of the 14th. So from January 9th to January 14th, 6 days, Elizabeth Short was alive, somewhere in this city, with someone. And her body had been completely washed. Every item of clothing she was wearing when she walked out of that hotel, gone. Her handbag, gone. Everything. So whoever had her somewhere for nearly a week. They cleaned her. They removed every trace of themselves. They packed her belongings into a box. And then they drove across Los Angeles in the dark and laid her out in a field. This was not panic. This was not a moment that got out of hand. This was someone. completely in control. The LAPD goes all in, one of the largest investigations in their history at that point. Detectives everywhere, tips flooding in. Over 150 suspects eventually investigated. And then the press arrived. They were at the crime scene before investigators had finished processing it, talking to witnesses before police got to them. And a journalist from the Examiner called Elizabeth's mother before police had even notified her. He told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest, just to get her talking, before telling her that her daughter was dead. Her mother found out that way. Just sit with that for a second. The coverage became so overwhelming that the investigation started collapsing under its own weight. Witnesses coming forward with memories already contaminated by what they'd read. Crime scene details published before investigators were done with them. And the false confessions. Men from all over the country calling in, walking into police stations, claiming they did it. So many of them that the real leads got buried under a mountain of noise the investigation never dug out from. And then there's this. One of the investigators who worked this case said years later that they had the right person in their sights early on. That they knew. He never said who. He never explained what happened to that lead. And that detail has never gone away. Now, I need to tell you about George Hodel. George Hodel was a Los Angeles physician. Charming, intelligent, well-connected in the city. He was looked at in the original investigation, one of many names, and nothing came of it. He eventually left the United States, spent decades living abroad, died in 1999, never charged with anything. And then his son started going through his belongings. Steve Hodel is a retired LAPD homicide detective. He knows what evidence looks like. He has spent his entire career around it. And as he goes through his father's things after his death, he starts finding things. Photographs he believes are of Elizabeth Short. Documents. His father's diaries. And as he starts cross-referencing his father's movements with the timeline of the case, he finds things that don't add up. And then he finds something in the historical records that stops him completely cold. In 1950, 3 years after the murder, the LAPD placed a listening device inside George Hodel's home. They were already watching him. And in the recordings captured from that device, investigators believed they could hear George Hodel making statements about the Black Dahlia case, incriminating ones. Those recordings were never used in court. George Hodel left the country shortly after, lived abroad for decades, comfortable, untouched. His own son, a trained homicide detective, spent years building a case against him, and George Hodel died free. He went to dinner parties after 1947, had conversations with colleagues, traveled the world, lived into old age, while Elizabeth Short's mother spent the rest of her life without her daughter, and never knew why. Here's where this case actually sits. George Hodel is the most credible suspect anyone has ever named. The circumstantial connections are real. The LAPD surveillance is real. The photographs his son found are real. But there is no DNA, no confession, nothing that closes it completely. And George Hodel is dead. Other names have been put forward. Walter Bailey, a doctor who lived near the vacant lot, whose family had a connection to Elizabeth's family. Researchers who believe the answer is sitting in a file that was lost or buried during the chaos of the original investigation. And then there's that investigator, the one who said they had the right person early. What happened to that lead? Who was it pointing at? Why didn't it go anywhere? Over 150 suspects investigated. Decades of work. A detective who built a case against his own father. And Elizabeth Short's killer died free. Elizabeth is buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland. And people visit her grave all the time. Strangers. People who never knew her. Leaving flowers, photographs, small things. The name on that headstone is just Elizabeth Short. Not the Black Dahlia. Not the headline. Just her name. A 22-year-old girl from Massachusetts who came to Los Angeles because she wanted something more. She deserved to get it. Whoever took that from her lived a full life after 1947, died somewhere comfortable, surrounded by people who had no idea, never held accountable, not once. So I need to know where you land on this. George Hodel, yes or no? The answer sitting in a file nobody has connected yet. Or that investigator was telling the truth. They had the right person and lost them in all the noise. Drop it in the comments. I'll be in there.